she whispered. "You'll regret choosing me." The rancher smiled. "I only regret waiting so long." The sun had barely risen over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the wide fields surrounding the small ranch town. The air smelled of fresh earth and hay, a smell that had become familiar and comforting to Ethan, a man who had lived on this land for most of his life. He was a rancher through and through, someone who woke before dawn, worked long hours tending to the animals, mending fences, and managing the endless needs of the land. Life on the ranch was not easy, but it was steady, predictable, and honest, and Ethan had always found a quiet satisfaction in that rhythm. On this particular morning, he was checking the north pasture, walking slowly along the worn wooden fence, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, damp earth. A light breeze ruffled his dark hair, and he paused to watch the cattle grazing peacefully. Life was simple here, but simplicity had a way of making a person appreciate the small details. The way the sun warmed the soil, the distant call of a bird, or the satisfaction of a well-fed herd breaks. Suddenly, in the distance, he noticed movement, a horse approaching from the main road that led into town. At first, it looked like a lone rider, but as the figure drew closer, Ethan could see the confident way the rider handled the horse. Perhaps she was not just passing through. She moved with purpose. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose braid, and her eyes sparkled with determination. There was something about her presence that immediately drew his attention, something he hadn't felt in a long time. As she came closer, Ethan could see her clearly. She had the kind of energy that made people take notice, not in a loud or flashy way, but in a way that demanded respect. She was strong, independent, and clearly not afraid of hard work. As she rode through the dusty street into the heart of the town, she slowed down and looked around, almost as if she was sizing up the place. There was curiosity in her eyes, but also a hint of challenge, as if she was ready to face whatever the town had to offer. But he couldn't help stealing glances in her direction. He had seen strangers come and go before, but there was something about her that felt different, like a force of nature, untamed yet graceful. Brow. He shook his head slightly, trying to focus on the work at hand, but the feeling lingered. It wasn't long before their paths crossed in a more direct way. A few blocks down near the small general store, a wagon had broken down. The wheel had come loose, and the owner was struggling to lift it back into place. Passers-by were hesitating, unsure how to help, when the rider, now dismounted, walked briskly toward the wagon.
Ethan watched as she knelt down, her hands working quickly and efficiently.
Without a word, she directed the owner on how to lift the wheel safely, demonstrating her knowledge with confidence. Ethan couldn't help but notice the way she moved, precise, strong, and purposeful. When she finally stood up, brushing dust off her hands, their eyes met. There was a spark of recognition, not because they knew each other, but because they both saw something familiar in the other, a sense of self-reliance and determination. "You'll regret choosing me," she said suddenly, her voice low and teasing, as if she were sharing a secret meant only for him. The words hung in the air, playful yet serious. There was a warning in them, but also an honesty that made them hard to ignore. Ethan smiled, not because he felt threatened or challenged, but because there was something about her that made him feel curious rather than cautious. He had spent many years alone, focused on the ranch, the animals, and the simple life he had built. He had learned patience, the value of hard work, and the importance of understanding people for who they truly were. And in that moment, he felt a quiet certainty that this woman, this stranger, was someone worth knowing. "I only regret waiting so long," he replied softly, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear. There was no arrogance in his tone, only a calm assurance that came from years of knowing himself and the life he led. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, two people recognizing a rare kind of understanding in one another. After that brief encounter, life in the town went on as usual, but both of them felt the subtle pull of curiosity and interest. Brash. Ethan returned to his ranch, tending to the animals in the land, yet he found his thoughts drifting back to the woman with the strong eyes and the teasing words. He wondered where she had come from, why she had chosen to enter their quiet town, and what made her so unafraid of speaking her mind. Clara, he learned her name later, was no ordinary visitor. Respect, helping where she could, asking questions, and sometimes challenging the townspeople in ways they weren't used to. People noticed her, and some admired her independence, while others whispered that she was difficult or unpredictable. But Ethan didn't judge. He had spent enough time around people to know that appearances could be deceiving. He sensed there was more to her than her bold words and spirited demeanor. One afternoon he saw her again near the edge of the river that ran behind the town. Pah! She was trying to fix a small cart for a young boy who had been struggling to carry firewood. Her hands were covered in dirt and her sleeves were rolled up, but she smiled warmly at the boy as she worked. Ethan watched from a distance, noticing the kindness in her actions, how she took the time to teach, to help, and to show patience.
It was a side of her that few people in town had seen, and it contrasted sharply with the warning she had given him just days before.
Ethan felt a sense of respect growing for her, not just for her strength and independence, but for the way she cared for others quietly without expecting recognition. He realized that her warning, "You'll regret choosing me," was not about cruelty or arrogance. It was about honesty. She knew her own strengths and flaws, and she was making sure anyone who got close understood the full picture. Their interactions remained brief at first. Small exchanges in the street, a shared task, or a helping hand, but each meeting left an impression. Ethan admired her courage and skill, while Clara seemed intrigued by his steady presence and quiet confidence. She didn't need him to save her or control her, and he didn't try. They simply acknowledged each other's strengths and found a subtle connection in the spaces between words and gestures. By the end of that first week, Ethan found himself thinking about her more than he expected. He wondered about her life before arriving in their town, about the experiences that had shaped her into someone so strong and independent. He also wondered if she could truly find someone who would understand her, who would see beyond the bold exterior to the person beneath. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, Ethan walked along the fence line, reflecting on the day's work. The ranch was quiet, the animals settling in for the night, and for the first time in years, he felt a small flutter of anticipation about the unknown. Meeting Clara had brought a new energy into his life, a sense that perhaps life could offer more than routine and solitude, that connection and understanding were possible, even in a world that often seemed predictable and slow. And in the quiet of that evening, he found himself smiling to himself, thinking about the words she had whispered, the spark in her eyes, and the curious, steady feeling in his own heart. It was the beginning of something neither of them could fully understand yet, but both sensed it. A chance meeting that could change everything. A connection that promised challenge, growth, and perhaps something far deeper than either of them had expected. Ethan didn't rush. He had spent his life learning the value of patience, and he knew that some things, like the land, the animals, and perhaps even people, needed time to reveal their true nature. He trusted that this woman, with her fiery spirit and strong will, would show him more of herself when the time was right. And in that trust, a quiet hope began to bloom. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he had finally met someone worth waiting for. The night settled over the ranch, stars appearing one by one in the clear sky, and Ethan walked back to the house. He was tired from the day's work, but his mind was alive with possibilities. Somewhere in the town, Clara was no doubt continuing her journey, unaware that she had already left a lasting impression on a man who had learned to wait patiently for the right moment, the right connection, and the right person. And so, the stage was set. As two strong, independent souls had met, and though neither fully realized it yet, their lives were about to become intertwined in ways that would challenge, inspire, and ultimately transform them both. The following days after Clara's first arrival were filled with small but meaningful encounters that slowly pulled Ethan and Clara into each other's worlds. The town, quiet and slow-moving, provided the perfect backdrop for these encounters, each one leaving a subtle mark on both of them. Clara moved through the streets with her usual confidence, carrying a bundle of firewood or helping a neighbor with a task. Perceive! She had a way of walking into a space and making people notice, not because she demanded attention, but because her presence had a natural force, a brightness that made the ordinary seem alive. Ethan observed her from a distance at first, as he tended to his ranch duties, but it was impossible to ignore her when she offered help to anyone in need. Whether it was fixing a fence, guiding a lost horse, or helping a child who had fallen in the street, he admired the way she carried herself, always upright, always alert, and yet always kind. There was a strength to her that was unmistakable, and it intrigued him. One afternoon the town held its weekly market, a place where farmers and townsfolk gathered to sell their goods, exchange news, and catch up on the week's events. Ethan had gone to the market to purchase supplies for the ranch, seeds, feed, and a few tools, but he found himself distracted by the chatter of the crowd. That's when he saw Clara again, helping the elderly storekeeper lift a large sack of grain onto a cart. Her laughter rang out as she worked, a sound that was both warm and confident.
Ethan walked over, careful not to startle her.
"Need a hand?" he asked, his voice steady and calm. Clara looked up, her eyes meeting his. A small smile curved her lips. "I think I've got it," she said, though it was clear she welcomed the offer. Together, they lifted the sack and placed it on the cart. There was a natural rhythm to the way they worked together, an unspoken understanding that made the task seem easy. Afterward, Clara leaned on the cart and wiped her hands on her trousers. "You're patient," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. Not many people would just stand back and watch instead of rushing in. Ethan shrugged lightly. "I like to see what people can do on their own first. It shows who they really are." He looked at her for a moment longer, the corners of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. "But you're stronger than most give you credit for." Clara's expression softened slightly. "Most people underestimate me." "I guess I like it that way. It keeps life interesting." Ethan nodded, understanding more than she realized. He, too, had spent much of his life underestimated or overlooked. He knew the quiet satisfaction of proving oneself, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. That understanding created a small bridge between them, a connection that didn't need words but was felt in the way they looked at each other, in the ease of their movements side by side. Over the next few days, their paths continued to cross. Psst, psst. Sometimes it was intentional, like when Ethan offered to guide her through the trails behind the ranch, showing her which paths were safe for riding and which areas were prone to sudden dips or muddy patches. Other times the encounters were accidental, like when they both reached for the same bundle of hay at the store, or when their horses walked side by side on the road to the river. Each meeting brought a new layer of familiarity, a subtle push and pull that neither fully understood yet. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the hills, Ethan found himself riding alongside Clara on a narrow trail. The town was quiet, the only sounds coming from the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a bird returning to its nest. Clara rode with ease, her posture confident, but her eyes occasionally darted to him, as if measuring his reactions. "You're quiet," she said after a while, breaking the silence. "Not like the other men in town. They talk too much, try to impress, or pretend to know everything." Ethan chuckled softly. "I've learned that listening tells you more than talking ever could. And I'm not here to impress anyone. I just want to get things done right." Pang.
Clara tilted her head, studying him. "I like that."
Rest. It's rare. There was a pause, the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty. For the first time, Clara didn't tease or challenge him. She simply rode, feeling the steady rhythm of her horse beside Ethan's, and allowed herself to notice the calm strength he carried. It was grounding, something she didn't often encounter. Most people she met were either intimidated by her or tried to control her. Ethan did neither. Over the next week, the town experienced a small emergency. A stray calf had wandered into a neighbor's property and was stuck near the creek, unable to free itself. Panic spread quickly, and several townsfolk rushed to help, but the calf was frightened, slipping in the mud and making the rescue more difficult than anyone anticipated. Clara was among the first to reach the scene. She knelt in the mud, speaking softly to the calf, guiding it towards safer ground. Ethan arrived shortly after, assessing the situation. Breath. He noticed the careful way she handled the animal, the combination of firmness and gentle guidance. He stepped in beside her, his hands steady, and together they managed to lead the calf back to safety. When it was finally free, Clara looked up at him, her face streaked with mud and sweat. "Not bad for a quiet man," she said with a teasing grin, brushing a streak of mud from his cheek. "You're not so bad yourself for someone who warned me I'd regret choosing you." Clara's eyes widened slightly, a flash of surprise passing over her features. I didn't think you'd remember that."
I do, Ethan replied calmly. And I like that you're honest about who you are.
It makes things easier.
That moment marked the turning point.
Clara began to see Ethan not just as a calm, dependable presence, but as someone who truly understood and respected her.
She had spent much of her life pushing people away, fearing that attachment would mean losing herself or being restricted.
But with Ethan, she felt neither pressure nor judgment. There was patience in his eyes, a steady assurance that allowed her to lower her guard just enough to be herself. Ethan, on the other hand, found himself increasingly drawn to Clara's energy. Her independence did not intimidate him. It fascinated him. Her laughter, her curiosity, and her determination brought a spark to his life that had been missing for years. He admired how she refused to settle for anything less than authenticity, and he respected her for it. As the week came to an end, they found themselves walking together toward the river, the path lined with wild flowers and tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. The conversation flowed easily, touching on small details of their lives. The way the ranch required careful attention, the stories of people in the town, and even the little quirks they noticed in each other. Each exchange deepened their understanding, revealing layers of character and humanity that were rare to find.
At the riverbank, Clara paused, staring at the water as it sparkled in the sunlight.
"It's peaceful here," she said softly, almost to herself. Ethan nodded. "It is. That's why I like it. Destroy. It reminds you to slow down, even if just for a moment."
She turned to him, a small, genuine smile forming on her lips.
You're different, Ethan. Most people wouldn't understand me.
But you get it.
He looked at her, his expression calm but warm. I don't just get it.
I respect it. And I'm not going anywhere. For the first time, Clara allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had met many people in her life, some who admired her, some who feared her, and some who wanted to change her. Ethan was none of those. He saw her for who she was, accepted her strength, and yet offered a quiet steadiness that didn't threaten her freedom. It was a rare combination, and she felt its weight, though she didn't fully understand it yet. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they walked back toward town, the sound of their steps mingling with the gentle rustle of leaves. Clara glanced at Ethan and couldn't help but smile.
You might not regret choosing me, she said softly, almost as if testing herself.
Thanks. Ethan looked at her, his smile calm and steady.
I only regret waiting so long, he replied, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had learned patience and knew its value.
That evening, as they parted ways at the edge of town, both felt a quiet shift. The first sparks of something meaningful had taken root, subtle yet undeniable. Clara rode away, her mind racing with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. Ethan returned to his ranch, the work awaiting him, but his heart was lighter, carrying a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. It was the beginning of a connection that promised growth, challenge, and perhaps even love, a connection built on respect, patience, and the recognition of true character in one another. Neither fully understood where it would lead, but both felt, deep down, that this meeting was different. This was not a fleeting encounter, but the start of something enduring. The days passed peacefully on the ranch, with the usual rhythm of chores, feeding livestock, and maintaining fences. Ethan found comfort in the predictability of his life, yet Clara's presence had begun to stir something unfamiliar, a quiet excitement he had long forgotten. She visited the ranch more often now, helping with small tasks, offering ideas, or simply sharing stories of her travels before arriving in town. There was a spark between them, subtle but undeniable, and both sensed that their connection was growing stronger, though neither had fully admitted it yet. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered unexpectedly over the hills. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying the scent of rain and the faint rumble of distant thunder. The townsfolk rushed to secure loose items, but the storm approached faster than anyone had anticipated. Lightning split the sky, followed by heavy sheets of rain that fell relentlessly, turning the dry earth into slippery mud. The river that ran behind the town began to swell, threatening to flood parts of the fields. Ethan immediately sprang into action. He had weathered many storms in his life, but this one was particularly severe. Pasture were in danger, and the livestock needed to be moved to higher ground. He grabbed his hat and coat, his mind racing through the tasks that needed immediate attention. Desk. He knew the storm would not wait, and any delay could mean serious damage to the ranch and the animals. Clara, seeing the storm hit the town while she was helping a neighbor, wasted no time. Breaths. She grabbed her own coat and ran toward the fields, determined to help wherever she could. Her horse carried her swiftly across the muddy terrain, and she reached Ethan just as he was rounding up the cattle. Bah! You shouldn't be out here, Ethan called over the wind, concern flashing in his eyes. It's dangerous! Clara smiled, unafraid.
I can handle it. You're not the only one who knows what they're doing. Ethan hesitated, torn between caution and admiration.
He had always respected Clara's independence and courage, but the intensity of the storm made the risks more real than ever. Yet, he knew arguing would be pointless. She was determined, and there was no stopping her once she set her mind to something. Together they worked quickly, guiding the cattle to higher ground and securing the fences as best they could. Rain soaked through their clothes, clinging to their skin, and the mud made every step a challenge. Yet there was a rhythm to their movements, a silent understanding that allowed them to coordinate without needing to speak. They knew each other's strengths, and each relied on the other naturally. At one point, a young calf slipped near the edge of the swollen creek, struggling to maintain its footing. Clara reached out instinctively, but the current was stronger than she anticipated. In an instant, Ethan was at her side, grabbing her arm and steadying both her and the calf. His strong hands held her firmly, and his calm voice guided the frightened animal to safety. Clara's heart raced, not from fear, but from the realization of how deeply she had come to trust him. She had always been self-reliant, preferring to handle situations on her own, but in that moment she recognized the value of having someone steady beside her, someone who could act decisively without judgment or control. When the immediate danger passed, they stood together, drenched and exhausted, watching as the storm continued to rage around them. The mud had caked to their boots, their hair plastered to their faces, yet neither complained. There was a shared sense of accomplishment and relief that transcended words. "You did well," Ethan said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. There was no teasing this time, no playful challenge, only sincerity. "You didn't panic. You stayed calm when it mattered most." Clara looked at him, a mixture of surprise and warmth in her expression. I couldn't have done it without you." Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, Clara."
"You're stronger than you think. I just helped when it was needed."
They both fell silent, the rain still falling around them, the storm's power echoing in the distance. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to feel vulnerable, not weak, but aware of how much she appreciated having someone like Ethan beside her. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. After the storm subsided, they returned to the ranch, muddy and soaked, but with a renewed sense of connection. Clara sat on the porch, warming herself by a small fire Ethan had built inside the barn. She wrung out her clothes, smiling faintly as she recalled the chaos of the afternoon.
"You're different from anyone I've ever met," she admitted, her voice soft.
"Most people would have told me to stay inside or they'd have scolded me for taking risks."
Ethan leaned against the doorframe, his expression calm, and I wouldn't have.
"You're capable. You just need someone to trust that you know what you're doing." Clara looked at him, her mind racing with thoughts she had buried for years. She had always feared attachment, fearing that anyone who came close would either try to change her or leave her behind. But Ethan was different. He didn't push, didn't judge, and didn't underestimate her. He saw her as she was, a capable, independent woman, and respected her fully. Over the next few days, the town buzzed with stories of the storm, and the way both Ethan and Clara had worked together to protect the livestock and property. People noticed how well they complemented each other. Her courage and energy, his calm and decisiveness. Some whispered that they made a perfect team, while others simply admired their ability to face challenges with grace and efficiency. For Clara, the storm had been a turning point. It revealed more than just her ability to handle danger. It revealed the depth of her feelings for Ethan. She realized that her teasing words, "You'll regret choosing me," were not just a playful warning. They were a shield, a way to protect herself from the possibility of care or love she wasn't sure she deserved. And yet, in the storm, she had seen his patience, his strength, and his unwavering presence. It made her question whether she had been right to protect herself so fiercely all these years. Ethan, too, felt the shift. He had always been patient, believing that some things, like the land, the animals, and people, required time and understanding. But the storm made him aware of how deeply he cared for Clara, not just as a companion in moments of crisis, but as someone whose presence had become essential to his life. He admired her strength, her independence, and her refusal to let fear control her decisions. And he understood that love wasn't about possession or control. It was about trust, respect, and being there when it mattered most. As they worked side by side to repair the minor damages the storm had caused, their conversation grew more personal. Clara spoke of the places she had traveled, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned from a life spent moving from one place to another. The long days on the ranch, the solitude, and the satisfaction of a life built on honest work. There was a quiet intimacy in their exchange, a growing awareness that they were discovering not just each other's strengths, but also their vulnerabilities. One evening, after a particularly long day of repairs and care for the animals, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the hills. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, reflecting off the wet fields left by the storm. Clara broke the silence first. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who doesn't try to change me, doesn't judge me, and yet understands me. Ethan looked at her, his eyes steady and warm. "I've been waiting a long time for someone like you," he said simply.
"I've learned that patience is worth it, especially when it comes to things that matter." Clara felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of relief, excitement, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life that included someone else, not as a restriction, but as a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between Ethan and Clara grew stronger. They shared quiet moments on the ranch, helped each other with chores, and spent evenings talking by the fire or riding along the trails. Their connection was not dramatic or rushed. It was steady, like the land itself, growing roots that promised stability and strength. But Clara still occasionally teased him, reminding him of her warning. "You'll regret choosing me." But Ethan always smiled, replying with the same calm assurance, "I only regret waiting so long," reinforcing the understanding that they were learning to trust, to respect, and perhaps to love. The storm had been more than a test of skill or courage. It had been a test of trust, patience, and connection. And both of them had passed it together, discovering a new depth in themselves and in each other. For Clara, it was a lesson in vulnerability and acceptance. For Ethan, it was a confirmation that some things, like true companionship, were worth waiting for, no matter how long it took. And as the nights grew quiet, the ranch bathed in the soft glow of the moon. Both Ethan and Clara felt the subtle shift in their lives. The beginning of something enduring, something that promised challenge, growth, and the possibility of love built on understanding and respect. The storm had passed, leaving the town and the ranch drenched but intact. The fields glistened in the morning sun, the mud slowly drying under the warm light, and the river flowed gently, as if nothing had disturbed its path.
But for Ethan and Clara, the storm had changed more than the landscape.
It had shifted the way they saw each other, revealing strength, patience, and trust that neither had fully expected. Clara arrived at the ranch early that morning, her horse kicking up small clouds of dust as she rode across the yard. She had decided that helping Ethan with the day's chores would not only be practical, but also a way to understand him better. The storm had shown her that he was steady, reliable, and brave. But she wanted to see the man behind the calm exterior, the one who had waited so long for something worth holding on to. Ethan was already tending to the horses when he saw her approaching. He offered a small smile. "You're early," he said, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I didn't want to waste a minute," Clara replied, dismounting with ease. "There's a lot to do, and I'm curious to see how you manage it all." Ethan chuckled softly. "You'll find it's not as exciting as it looks, but there's always work to be done." They began their tasks together, repairing a fence damaged by the storm. Clara worked efficiently, her hands strong and sure, while Ethan guided her, offering advice only when necessary. There was an ease between them now, a rhythm born from trust and repeated collaboration. As they worked, they shared stories about their lives, past experiences, and small, personal details that they had not revealed before. Clara hesitated at first, but she eventually opened up about her life before arriving in town. She spoke of a childhood spent moving from place to place, never staying long enough to form lasting friendships. She told Ethan about the challenges of independence, about learning to rely on herself, and about the fear of letting anyone close enough to hurt her. Each word was careful, measured, yet carried a quiet vulnerability she rarely showed to anyone. Ethan listened attentively, never interrupting, never judging. He could see the layers beneath her spirited exterior, the fear she had built, the walls she had constructed, and he understood. He had lived a life of solitude, too, learning to trust the land, the animals, and himself before allowing anyone else in. There was a mutual understanding between them, one born of experience, patience, and the recognition of resilience. "You've been through a lot," Ethan said gently, his voice steady. "It explains a lot about why you are the way you are."
And I admire you for it. Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his. Most people would have seen me as reckless. But you don't judge me.
You just understand me.
Ursap. That's because I respect who you are, Ethan replied simply. You don't need to change for anyone, and I don't expect you to. I see the strength in you, and I appreciate it. Her lips curved into a small, thoughtful smile. It's rare to find someone like that. Round in disgust, someone who doesn't try to control you or tell you what to do.
Ethan nodded.
Bird. It is rare. That's why I'm willing to wait for it, when it's worth it. They fell into a comfortable silence, working together as the morning passed. The air was filled with the sounds of animals, the creaking of the wooden fence, and the occasional laughter or comment from Clara as she teased Ethan lightly. There was no pressure in their interactions, no expectation beyond the shared work and quiet companionship. Yet beneath it all, both felt a growing emotional bond, a connection that had been slowly building since the day they first met. Later in the afternoon, they paused for a break, sitting on the edge of the barn steps. Clara sipped from a tin cup of water, her eyes on the horizon where the storm clouds had cleared. Do you ever wonder if things could be different? She asked softly. Ethan glanced at her, curious. Breaths. Different how? Different with someone.
A life that includes someone else, not just the work, the land, and the routine.
Her voice was hesitant, betraying a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show.
Ethan considered this for a moment, his gaze steady. I have wondered, he admitted, but only with the right person. Someone who respects what I've built. Someone who understands patience and hard work. Someone who is worth waiting for. Clara turned to him, a flicker of emotion passing over her face. Bray. And you think you found that? Ethan smiled faintly. I think I might be meeting her. The words made Clara's heart skip a beat. She had spent much of her life avoiding attachments, fearing that they would compromise her freedom or bring disappointment. But here was Ethan, someone who didn't try to change her, someone whose patience and understanding made her feel safe. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could be open, honest, and vulnerable without losing herself. The days that followed were filled with small, shared moments that deepened their bond. They worked together to repair fences, feed the animals, and tend to the fields, always side by side, always in sync. Clara began to see the beauty in routine, not as a restriction, but as a shared experience that allowed them to grow closer.
Ethan, in turn, found joy in her presence, in the way she brought energy, curiosity, and laughter to the ranch.
Bray. One evening, after the chores were done, Ethan suggested a walk along the trails behind the ranch. The sun was low, casting a golden glow over the fields and hills. Inspiration. Clara agreed, and they walked together in comfortable silence, the soft crunch of dirt and grass beneath their boots the only sound. I've never stayed in one place for this long, Clara admitted, her voice thoughtful. Psst. I've always moved, always been on the go. And yet here, with you, it feels Bray. Different. Safe, but not confining. Ethan nodded. It's rare to find that balance. Freedom and trust don't always come together, but when they do, it's worth holding on to. They reached a small clearing overlooking the river, the water sparkling in the evening light. Clara leaned against a tree looking out at the gentle flow. I don't know why, but I feel like I can let my guard down around you, she said softly. Ethan looked at her, his expression calm and sincere. That's because I don't want to change you. I want to understand you, support you, and be here when you need someone. Nothing more, nothing less. Clara's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and warmth. She had spent years fearing intimacy, fearing judgment, fearing disappointment. But Ethan's presence showed her that connection didn't have to mean losing herself. It could mean finding someone who accepted her fully, flaws and all, someone who saw her strength and cherished it. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life that included him, a life where independence and partnership could coexist, where laughter and trust could grow alongside responsibility and work. And in that imagining, she felt a spark of hope she hadn't experienced in years. Ethan, too, felt the shift in their relationship. He had always been cautious with his heart, careful to guard against disappointment. But Clara's honesty, courage, and openness showed him that trust was possible. He admired her resilience, her intelligence, and her fiery spirit, and he understood that true connection required patience, understanding, and respect. Past. As the sun set behind the hills, casting the world in soft shades of orange and pink, they began walking back toward the ranch. The conversation turned to lighter topics, shared memories, small jokes, and playful teasing. But beneath it all was a quiet intimacy that neither could ignore.
Every glance, every touch, every shared moment built a foundation of trust and emotional closeness.
By the time they reached the ranch, night had fallen, and the stars glittered in the clear sky. They paused at the gate, neither ready to part ways just yet. Clara looked at Ethan, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. You really are different," she said softly. "Desk, you see me. Not just the person I show to the world, but the real me." Ethan smiled, a warmth in his gaze. "I see you, and I'm not going anywhere." Clara's lips curved into a small, genuine smile, one that carried relief, gratitude, and a hint of something deeper. For the first time, she felt that it was possible to let someone in without fear, to trust without hesitation, and to embrace the connection that had been quietly growing between them. As she rode away that night, the ranch fading behind her, Clara thought of Ethan's words, "I'm not going anywhere." She realized that trust and love weren't about possession or control. They were about respect, patience, and understanding. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to explore what that could mean for her and for him. The storm had tested them, but it had also revealed the depth of their bond. And as the night settled over the town, both Ethan and Clara knew that something profound was growing between them. A connection built on honesty, patience, and the courage to open their hearts without fear.